Edward Nigma, Mr. Enigma. I find the Riddler to be a somewhat puzzling character. No pun intended. I was watching a playthrough of Batman Arkham Knight when I noticed something peculiar. The Riddler puts Batman through a series of challenges involving traps, levers, timed puzzles, labyrinthine mechanical contraptions, and a surprising amount of deadly obstacle course racing. As I watched this all unfold, a thought occurred to me, realization dawning on me about the true nature of the spectacle I was viewing, because in truth, the Riddler would have spent tens of millions of dollars at the very least in order to construct this giant puzzle box. What could possibly motivate a person, any person really, villain or otherwise, to dedicate vast amounts of time and resources on such an endeavor? In part 0 of this series, I elaborated on the dynamic at the heart of the relationship between the hero and the villain. But if you didn't watch part 0, you don't have to worry. Here's the most relevant portion of it. Well, the concept of superheroes lies at the center of the struggle between good and evil, the war between light and darkness, tyranny and freedom, goodwill and malice. The hero stands as the vanguard against that which would do harm to the world, the stalwart guardian against corrupting forces. Across societies and throughout the ages, we have concepted of and been inspired by those who would heed the call and rise to the occasion. Except that the concept of a superhero transcends that. A hero is simply someone who steps forward to right a wrong, whether or not a tangible enemy is involved. After all, both hunger and homelessness are foes worthy of being fought against and defeated. But somewhere along the line we came up with the idea of a person who epitomizes this grand ideal on a supernatural scale. Replacing the mundane evils we find it so difficult to rid ourselves of with the hero's dark counterpart, a being born solely of narrative. The modern superhero's existence is inextricably tied to this nemesis. The hero needs the villain. Once Batman punches the Joker in the face and puts him in handcuffs, all of the excellent problems that plague Gotham melt away. Systemic poverty still leads to rampant crime on the streets of Gotham, but the supervillain creates a replacement effect. Because once they're behind bars... Now, with all of that re-established, we can see the villain as a representative figure. The villain is meant to be a reflection. Of what, you might ask? Well, that depends on the narrative at play. Typically speaking, the villain is both a foil to the hero and a mechanism which enables the hero to showcase their capabilities and potential. The hero needs the villain because the villain enables the hero. Batman is the world's greatest detective, so the man who can solve any puzzle, uncover any mystery, and reveal any hidden truth needs to have those skills challenged. Don't get me wrong, this isn't a bad thing. Any protagonist should face challenges for the narrative completion of their story. But beyond serving the purpose of completing Batman's story, why is the Riddler doing any of this? Does Edward Nigma have a personal ethos, an ideology he follows, a philosophy he adheres to, convictions, goals, aspirations? And I mean this beyond the vague and nebulous motivation of making unbeatable puzzles. Because at the point of you creating fully articulated and functional robots, you might as well start a technology company. Compare the Riddler to Mr. Freeze, a man whose one and only motivation for becoming a criminal was to find a way to cure his wife's illness, to save her life. By comparison, the Riddler feels like a shallow pastiche. There is, however, one version of the Riddler who, while not likable, does have an answer for each of the questions I asked earlier. A version of the Riddler with actual characterization. The Batman, starring Robert Pattinson in the titular role, has one of the more interesting portrayals of Gotham City. This Riddler takes a definitive shift away from most other portrayals of character, where most others are like the modern equivalent of malicious trickster spirits from old legends. Instead, this is a man disillusioned with the status quo and radicalized by extremist ideologies. He seeks to upheave the established order while trying to violently root out what he feels is the corruption and rot at the heart of society in Gotham. His ideology is hateful, vindictive, and destructive. But there is corruption and rot at the heart of Gotham. There are problems and issues plaguing this society. An orphan who grew up thinking he needed to punish the kind of people who killed his parents. A young woman searching for a sense of identity, as she endures the exploitation within the darker side of the city, while surviving off of exploitation herself. A weary and worn detective struggling to hold everything together while things crumble around him. Bruce Wayne, Selina Kyle, Jim Gordon, Carmine Falcone, Oswald Cobblepot, Edward Nygma. In the Batman movie, these characters are not reflections of Batman himself. They are instead reflections of society at large. An almost mythical representation of the people of Gotham City, and their efforts to either solve the problems their society faces, or monopolize on those same problems for their own profit and gain. And much like what I said in part 0 about Captain America the Winter Soldier, these are elements of a story which introduce varying levels of nuance. A well-written villain should not exist solely in service to the hero's narrative. Instead, both hero and villain should be reflections of the deeper elements of the overarching story, representations of the world they inhabit. The actions they take should not only have a deep impact on the world, but should also be a culmination of their experiences within it. Hydra wasn't merely an evil mastermind bent on world domination. It was a system of ideologies and corrupted ideals, built on the framework of a false sense of security and control, which was only allowed to grow via a status quo of domineering systems which ignored systemic problems. The Riddler wasn't merely a mustache-twirling engineer of deadly traps. He was a symptom of the tightly knit network of exploitation and degradation which continues to plague Gotham, a system that cannot simply be punched into submission. And with that being said, the villain as a reflection of society is used quite effectively as an introduction to the ultimate nemesis within My Hero Academia, All For One. All For One's origin story is shown to us in dreams and visions given to Midoriya through the enigmatic power of his quirk. When faced with a crisis, people often cling to anything that seems like it will provide answers, clarity, stability, and safety. In a world thrown into chaos by the sudden manifestation of supernatural abilities by regular people, anyone who reliably steps forward to solve this problem will be seen in a glorious light. Where All For One is concerned, he had the prescience and ingenuity to both solve society's problems and monopolize on them for his own gain. This is directly illustrated when he is shown to take the quirk of one person who sees quirks as a curse, while giving one to a person who dreams of having greater strength. It's a very simple but effective way of portraying his rise to power. He maneuvers people and groups to more effectively seize control over large segments of society, while eliminating those who would get in his way. He establishes order and rule sets around which he is the central axis. So ultimately, the question I want to ask of All For One is, why is he a villain? This is one of the primary failings of the superhero genre. Characters are, more often than not, framed around which side of the hero-villain dichotomy they land on, with a little room for nuanced storytelling outside of this dynamic. And so, society itself has to be narrowly framed around it as well. A desperate struggle, where the vulnerability of those born with quirks is pitted against the hatred and distrust of the rest of society. All For One cannot simply be a charismatic leader with megalomaniacal tendencies. If that were the case, then one could imagine a more nuanced telling of the story. Hatred is not a simple emotion, so you either need to explore a society divided along communal, socio-political, and factional lines, which would gestate into something much different than Japan but everyone has superpowers, or you could just have All Might tell Midoriya that certain things don't make it into the history books and avoid the obvious question that comes next. Then, how was all of this resolved without there being massive societal changes, and why are there no visible indicators of past conflicts and upheavals? Because that question might lead to subplots regarding secret government programs and conspiracies, clandestine organizations meant to pacify and control society. And it's pretty clear that Horikoshi has no intention of telling either of those two stories. And thus, All for One needs to have the underlying framework of being cartoonishly evil. If you made him more nuanced, he might not end up being a villain, and you would need to create what I mentioned earlier, a Japan divided. Now, you could argue that Horikoshi did provide an answer to that hypothetical question. Superheroes. People who heeded the call and sought to rebuild society, giving hope and comfort to those around them. But that's an incredibly unlikely answer to the question. We've already established that society's problems are solved by society. Hero is a retroactive label applied to those who pioneer solutions to the problems they encounter, whether those problems are a result of intentional maliciousness or mere misfortune. It is also usually a communal effort. Horikoshi would still need to explain how such individuals and communities went from people simply solving problems around them to people wearing capes. There happens to be one prominent media franchise which showcases these themes with near perfect narrative structure. But that exploration is for a video further in the future. For now, the question comes back to All for One, and the fact that in spite of clever writing, he still ends up being a reflection of the hero, who starts out being All Might, but effectively becomes Deku. So if the villain invariably becomes a reflection of the hero, we need to dissect what the hero themselves represents, a concept we will explore in the next video. So the question I would like everyone to ponder for roughly the next 2 weeks is, who is a better Batman than Batman? Like and subscribe and discuss in the comments, and you'll get the answer in the next chapter of this saga. See you then!